Strategic Affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal and to this special show on Sri Lanka. I'm Surya Gangadharan and I have with me our Editor-in-Chief, Nitin Gokhale. Nitin, welcome. We are going back to the country that you were there in, I think, less than 2
About a
months
month ago. Exactly a month ago. Thanks, Surya. And it is deteriorated in no time. I mean, it started the day I was leaving, the agitation there, the latest agitation and the protests. And within a month, it has slided to almost an anarchy which nobody visualized really.
Nitin, when you look at the constitutional position today, there's no prime minister. The opposition is telling the president to resign. What do we do in this situation?
Well, according to the one cursory glance at the Sri Lankan constitution, tells me that there is a provision that the parliament will elect the president if he steps down before his term expires. In this case, let's assume that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa decides to quit under pressure. Then there is almost 2.5 years of his term left, which ends in maybe November or December, or maybe even January 2025, which is nearly 2.5 years. So then the parliament has to elect a president from amongst its current members of parliament. That's the provision, but that's theoretical provision. Now, I doubt whether President Gotabaya has any intentions to step down, given the grim situation that Sri Lanka finds itself both politically and economically. I don't see anybody else willing to take up that responsibility by forcing him to step down. Although the opposition has made noises that he should step down, he should give up his seat. But it remains to be seen who wants to take up that difficult throne, which now seems completely untenable in terms of how to govern the country.
What do you think President Gotabaya is doing now to salvage the situation? Is he relying on the army? Because I understand the army is kept fairly widespread in the government.
Oh, yes. In fact, the emergency that has been declared just a few days ago, in fact, on Friday, gives widespread powers to the president, of course, who's already above the parliament in terms of who can dismiss him. He cannot be unseated or dismissed until the parliament votes, 2/3 of its members vote for ousting him. But even under the emergency powers, the army and the police get widespread powers. In fact, I was just looking at a Ministry of Defense statement which has warned the protesters against damaging property or even damaging or attacking people. So I suspect, given the army's larger than life role in Sri Lankan governing structure, the army will support Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who, let us remember, has been a war-decorated hero, also credited by the people and the army for leading the fight against LTT and winning it in 2009. So the army is fairly supportive of President Gotabaya, and I suspect it will continue to do so until the situation stabilizes. But that may not be very palatable to the Western nations as well as the civil society. And currently, the mood in the civil society as well as common people in Sri Lanka is quite hostile to any of the Rajapaksas, including Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who had a better standing amongst all the other brothers. But even he's under pressure, and we do not know how this will pan out. For the moment, he's clinging on and saying that he will try and restore stability, both political and economic.
You are referring to the army's situation in Sri Lanka. It seems to mirror that of Pakistan. There every section of government. It's a tricky situation, isn't it?
It is. There's one difference between Pakistan and Sri Lanka in the sense that there are no this military industrial complex or the military business that the Pakistanis have perfected and continue to control Pakistani generals. In Sri Lanka, that is not so. What is in Sri Lanka and what is the current situation is that in many of the important institutions, including the intelligence, the internal intelligence agency, the health ministry, were all being manned by either former, and there is a defense secretaries or any of the internal security minister. They're all former military officers who were at the forefront of the war against LTT between 2006 and 2009, are confidants of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and therefore they are very close to him, and they continue to enjoy his confidence. That's the current status. So it will be little difficult to compare Pakistan and Sri Lanka in that sense, because they don't control businesses; they control the instruments of power, you can say, or some of the institutions like the intelligence agency, the health ministry. In fact, when the first wave of COVID happened, the entire planning and control of COVID in Sri Lanka was held up as a great example by the world. And that happened because the military officials, the former military officials, and their current successors actually helped President Gotabaya to get the situation under control. So there is a section within the Sri Lankan society which thinks that all answers lie within the military or the security setup. And of course, there is a larger section which pushes back against any such notion.
Since you're referring to civil society, when I look at the mobs in the streets, one gets the impression there is no discernible leadership there. I mean, we've seen this pattern in other countries, Sudan, for instance, perhaps even the farmers' protests we had not very long ago here. No discernible leadership. That seems to be a new pattern now.
Yes, I think it's a result of the pent up anger. That's what comes out, because leadership, political leaders always have an agenda. While the people who come out or who came out at the golf face in mid-April last month, in protest against shortages and the downturn in the economy, a serious downturn in the economy, were actually professionals from various walks of life. There were students, there were lawyers, there were IT professionals, there were architects. So it was a very civil and a very civic kind of a protest,
Absolutely,
which was happening, very, very peaceful. The turning point, in my view, came yesterday on Monday, when thugs who belong perhaps to former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's constituency or to his party were unleashed or went to the golf face and started beating up the peaceful protesters. I think that has become a turning point, and that has now descended into a free for all. And all the years of pent up anger that is now coming out, where we are seeing incidents of members of parliament, their houses and their properties being set on fire, the roadblocks on the road to the airport being put up by protesters, checking whether any of the MPs, Rajapaksa loyalists, are leaving the country. So it's all the pent up anger against the family for right or wrong reasons is all coming out, and it's very visible on the streets.
Assuming Gotabaya survives this test of fire, do you think the family will come back into government at some point, or will he ensure they stay out?
I think in the short term, it's very difficult to see Mahinda Rajapaksa or his children coming back into politics in Sri Lanka in the foreseeable future. I think Mahinda Rajapaksa has damaged his credibility permanently. It was always known that he had a strongman streak. He had a very rustic kind of approach to politics, and he survived more than 50 years in politics in various capacities. But yesterday's reaction and this morning, the fact that he had to be evacuated, he and his family members had to be evacuated from their official residence to a naval base in the east of Sri Lanka at Trincomalee, reportedly, where again people are gathering in large numbers, is symptomatic of the fact that the pent-up anger against Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is the most prominent of the Rajapaksa brothers politically, has now spilled over. And therefore, I don't see them coming back into politics immediately, at least not his own family. And the other brothers were anyway not fully into politics in terms of popularity. They were backroom boys. Basil Rajapaksa is the what we call an organizer of the party, grassroots organizer. The other brother, Gotabaya, as you know, was in the military and came back as a professional bureaucrat as defense secretary and later became president. So, one of the failures of Gotabaya Rajapaksa that has been attributed over the past 2.5 years, apart from COVID and the lack of tourists coming into Sri Lanka, is his ability to connect with politicians of all hues and having that touch, as they call it, the common touch that he lacks because of his background and his training, and therefore we see the situation in Sri Lanka where we are today.
Let's come to that the key question, India. Now, I have a question from Raju Hirani. What can the Indian government do? Well, basically, what he's saying is, what can India do to help the situation, and what about Indian citizens?
Well, I don't think there is anger against Indian citizens or against Indian interest in Sri Lanka. Not that there are very many interests in terms of assets or any of the industries in Sri Lanka from the Indian side. Indian citizens, I don't think, are in the harm's way at all. This anger, as evident in the last 24 hours or more, is against the Rajapaksas in particular and the politicians in general, who have been very indifferent to the plight of the common people. And therefore, the anger has spilled over. So, I don't think we should worry so much about what will happen to Indian citizens in Sri Lanka. But what can India do? Well, India can do many things, and India is doing many things in the past 6 months. Ever since this, the situation became very clear that Sri Lanka is headed to an economic disaster. So India has helped in terms of soft loans, and overall, if you see, India has already extended help to the tune of $3.4 billion in various ways. There are lines of credit for buying petroleum products, essential food items, medicines, and also more and more consignments of diesel and petroleum products are being shipped to Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is dependent on oil imports very much like India, maybe a little more in terms of proportion of its imports and the use of petroleum products. So India has helped in whichever way. Now, beyond that, how will India look at the situation will depend on what happens in the next 24 hours. And we'll have to wait and watch on that front at least.
Do you foresee a situation where we may be asked to, help out with the law and order situation there, or provide some other kind of support?
Well, I think that will be adding fuel to the fire. So I don't think India would like to go and intervene or sort of add fuel to the fire, given the kind of situation that exists today. Although in the past, almost 51 years ago, India has done that when JVP insurrection was burning the country in 1971 or even earlier. Then that time, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, as Prime Minister, had sent help to Sri Lanka, had helped Sri Lanka that time. And during the LTT, the war against the LTT, India had helped in terms of intelligence and some of the non-lethal weapons. But here, I don't see physical boots on the ground going from India if people are thinking of in those terms, because that will be the end of India's goodwill amongst the people in Sri Lanka. So I don't think that will happen.
When we look at the Chinese, they've been rather quiet through this crisis. How would you describe their position today?
I think the Chinese are playing the wait and watch game, and they are not very happy that Sri Lanka went to IMF for restructuring of their loans and their bailing them out or seeking a bailout from IMF. One, because it affects their loans, their lines of credit. They do not want IMF to look into the books that exist as far as Chinese loans are concerned. So they have taken a hands-off approach. They have now said that we're not very happy. Although Ali Sabri, who gave us an interview, the finance minister of Sri Lanka, he did appeal to the Chinese during that interview that you please understand our position, that nobody else will give us the kind of money that we are looking for the bailout.
Yeah.
So I think the Chinese are waiting and watching. They're playing the patient game. They do not want to intervene or even suggest or give an impression that they are trying to bail out the Rajapaksas, because one of the points of anger against the Rajapaksas before this crisis has been that they were very close to the Chinese and they have benefited from their closeness to the Chinese, both financially and politically. So the Chinese are keeping a low profile because they do not want to be targets. They have some of the projects that are ongoing, that they have built some of the assets. Although they have come out of those projects and have taken the money back, or at least taken the lease or taken collaterals from the Sri Lankan government. So I think they are in a pretty comfortable position at the moment. It's India and perhaps the US which wants to sort of make sure that Sri Lanka doesn't slide into anarchy and does come out of this the current grim situation. But Chinese will wait and watch, and then maybe they'll come out with some kind of a statement or some help. But at the moment, they're not part of this damage control anywhere in Sri Lanka, at least to my understanding.
Hmm. The whole thing that comes out of all this is that the politician today is the most reviled figure in Sri Lanka. And how does this affect their politics going forward? I mean, who now has the credibility to take over and to kind of salvage things now? Is there anybody out there?
Apart from the lack of credibility, see, the Sri Lankans experimented with a non-Rajapaksa regime or a government
Yeah.
between 2015 and 2020, and it was a disaster. It was projected when Maithripala Sirisena became the president unexpectedly in January 2015. It was projected as a complete revolution, a clean break from the Rajapaksas. But the very people, the same people who had elected Maithripala and then Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime Minister, voted Gotabaya Rajapaksa back as the president, and Mahinda Rajapaksa's newly formed party, the SLPP, with majority in the parliament, and made him the Prime Minister. So the people have been fickle. They have also not distinguished between different political parties, and all politicians have actually damaged their own credibility by being profligate and not being responsible financially or economically, or not having found any solutions to Sri Lanka's perpetual financial problem. See, one of the
Yeah.
things that people forget in the current situation is that this is not just the result of mismanagement in the past 3 years, let's say, but it's a result of a 20-year or 15 to 20-year-old mismanagement of the economy and profligacy shown by every government since let's say 2000, the year 2000 at the turn of century, and even people have forgiven them time and again. I do not know whether this is a clean break from that nature, cyclical nature of politicians coming back after being damaged, after having damaged credibility. But today, like you said, you asked me whether there's anybody to take on. Nobody seems to be even
Will.
heeding the appeal from the president to have a national unity government.
Hmm.
Ranil Wickremesinghe is there. Maithripala Sirisena, former president, is there. There is the opposition leader, Sajid Premadasa. They could step up and say, okay, I will become prime minister. But none of them are saying that because they know that it's a hopeless situation. So therefore, I do not see any one of them having the credibility to lead the country out of the current chaos, and they'll have to muddle through whatever the current dispensation is what
Mhm.
looks likely in the short run at least.
Hmm. Because when I look at them going to the IMF for a loan, the conditions are going to be so stringent, it's going to add to the anger in the streets.
Or there is, I think there's going to be a toxic combination because the IMF conditions will be not just stringent, but IMF will ask for many of the white elephant government-owned
They wound up.
entities to be closed, like the
Hmm.
Ceylon Electricity Board, like the Sri Lankan Airline, like the other agencies that are there, which have been fattened with government money and are overstaffed. So all that will have to go. Once that goes, there will be job losses in the short run. There will be, economic hardships. The people will have no income really, and tourism, if it doesn't pick up, given the images that have been going around in the past 24 hours, even whatever hope there was for tourism to pick up after
Yeah,
the
gone now.
it's gone now. Nobody's going to come there, go there. I mean, who is going to risk their life to go into Sri Lanka, which is such a beautiful country, has so many beautiful sites and the places to visit. But now I think it's doomed for at least another 3, 4 months or 6 months at least
Mhm.
in the short run. So that I think is a double whammy as far as Sri Lankans are concerned. And I don't think people are realizing this, that by doing what they're doing in terms of protest and killings and arson, they're actually harming the economy in the long run.
Mhm. Another point, Nitin, this ethnic unity that we are seeing in Sri Lanka, uh, is it fragile? I mean, because given the long history of animosity between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, and later on Sinhalese and the Muslims, I mean, to me it seems rather tenuous. It may not take
So,
much for a smart politician to get in and
and
put
again
things up.
divide them, again
Yeah.
divide them. So no, but like you started with the first question, whether there is no leadership here. So I think the protests to begin with have been very spontaneous, and rightfully so, because it was the pent up anger and pent up frustration that was coming out in the streets, and very peacefully. I mean, that was the thing, and therefore all these people, all the communities came together. There was no divide there.
Yeah.
But once this subsides, when this stabilizes, when the anger, and people go back to their basic needs and sort of have to generate incomes and jostle for the crumbs, if I can call it that. At the moment, there is only that. So therefore, then the divide will be apparent, because
Yeah.
the divide hasn't gone away. The fault lines are still there, and
Yeah.
like you said,
Absolutely.
politicians are adept in doing what they do best. By dividing people, they survive. So I don't have much of a hope there in the long run. But at the moment, yes, everybody is united by one common factor: the hardships, the economic hardship, and that may even sort of turn the tide in favor of the people. But in absence of any credible leader, how long will this momentum last? Again, remains to be seen.
Mhm. So, last question. The ability of the man in the street to sustain this agitation is limited. After a point, he will start looking at his family, food on the table, that kind of thing. So, perhaps we this may not last long, or
It
that's
will
what we
know.
hope.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I think. The hope is that this once the immediate anger subsides, when people start looking at the consequences of the image that is going out to the world, they will also realize that this is not helping anybody. Although the anger against the politicians is justified, anger against mismanagement of the economy, anger against the government, which is overstaffed, which is profligate, will continue. But what is the solution? I mean, that's the question every common Sri Lankan will ask himself or herself. And they will go back, they'll have to go back to the basics. I mean, that's my concern. They're such warm people, they're such friendly people, and they've been put into this position of hopelessness through a
Despair. Yeah.
combination of factors, like I mentioned, not just profligacy, but also the situation. In fact, if at all the anger, I think, should be directed at China for unleashing COVID on the world. And this is a consequence of the COVID, because for 2 years, no tourists could come to Sri Lanka because of the COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
And $6 billion a year comes as income through tourism into Sri Lanka, which is enough to sustain them in terms of foreign exchange reserves. Hasn't come for 2 years. So you can imagine the plight. I hope people realize this, that this COVID is responsible for, largely responsible for the immediate mess. I'm not talking
Hmm.
about political mess or the long-term economic mess, but immediate mess is also has come because of COVID. and the anger, if at all, should be directed against the Chinese more than anything else, apart from the politicians and the mismanagement of the bureaucracy.
Perhaps the Chinese are not visible enough, you know. Your
Exactly.
Rajapaksas are there
Unlike
in so
India,
many
yeah.
numbers.
And Rajapaksas are there in large numbers. So are Indians. So are their own MPs and politicians. So they'll have to bear the brunt. They had a good run so far. Maybe this is a bad
Yeah,
downturn.
yeah. Unfortunate. So maybe when things settle down, Nitin, you should make another trip and get a
Yes,
sense again of what's going on.
I certainly will.
Thanks very much. And for all of you there who joined us, thank you again for those questions. We couldn't answer all of them, but I think we have covered most of the issues that have come up here in your questions. So, Nitin, thanks very much, and looking forward to this mess ending soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Surya.
Thank you. And for all of you who have tuned in to us, thank you for all those questions again. Keep coming to us for more shows of this kind. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and social media. Thank you and good night.